Thanks everybody for joining us today. You're here for Don't Just Sit There. It's time to rethink your sales coverage model. We have with you, I'm Jason Hubbard. I'm Vice President of Growth at SalesIntel. And we have John M. Coe, who is the CEO of B2BMarketing. And John's going to be leading us in our webinar discussion today.
Over to me. Okay. Well, thanks for the introduction. So today's webinar is on the obvious topic of rethinking your sales coverage model. As Jason mentioned, they'll be sending a link to the recording, and there's a fairly long white paper attached to this as well. That'll be sent as well. There's a lot of additional information and contacts on that white paper. During the course of this webinar, I'll be talking about some topics and thought I'd offer up 3 additional white papers for the audience if they'd like. We'll be talking about each one of these individually, but just email me at the email address below. Unfortunately, my website is in redesign, as well as the sales coverage model is in redesign, so you'll need to just send me an email to request the white papers. Okay, next. I liked this slide talks about old and new, and of course one of the ways to look at this is I'm old. I've been around a long time. Spent my career in 2 categories, sales and marketing. Some people say I talk out of both sides of my mouth. One side is sales and one side is marketing. But this is not about me. It's about hopefully you and the new things that are going to happen post-COVID-19. I'm not going to regurgitate all the things that everybody's heard in the last couple months about all of the situations that we're faced with. And so I'm just going to dive into the material, but I'd like to just briefly mention I have had extensive experience in sales and sales management, and today I'm really going to be talking from that perspective. And so in the next 25 minutes, we have a lot to cover. I'm going to talk fast. Hopefully the recording will allow you to come back at it if you need to. And I'm also not going to talk about all the issues that we know that are going on right now. I'm going to dive into the material, but my goal today is to give you input and basically an outline as to what you should be thinking and maybe doing in terms of your sales coverage model. That's obviously the title of the webinar. And in the past 10 or 15 years, maybe longer than that, there's already been some big changes in the sales environment that we face. Obviously, calls per day have decreased from an average of 4 to below 2 now. Cost per call, excuse me, has gone up. A recent study I found showed a cost per call of $597. The question is what your cost per call is. The number of contacts for lead generation have gone up. And something that isn't talked about a great deal, and that is the number of contacts within the customers has also gone up as well. The length of the sales cycle is longer, and it's going to get much longer, I think, in the next 12 to 18 months. And then finally, this study about how far down the buying process the buyer is before they engage. That's a fairly controversial number, but anyways, that's going to increase as well. Finally, this is what we're going to talk about. 5 areas that I think we should focus on now to consider how we want to redo our sales coverage model. Frankly, it's in need of redoing or restructuring. Clearly, it's going to change, and the question really only before the house is how dramatically will it change for you? These are the 5 areas. I'll not read them all off because I'm going to talk about each one individually. But the fact of the matter is that these are the 5 most important areas that I feel you should be focused on to give you the raw material, the input, the insight into how you want to rethink and redo your sales coverage model. All right, let's get started. Area number 1. Where are you now? A lot of companies know some of these numbers, not all of them, but it's important to know the current benchmarks of your sales organization. I've broken it down into 2 areas, and these are not the number of calls, but these are the types of calls by actual number and percentage of the current sales force. I've given you some generic titles as to how to quantify them. Prospecting, obviously, we know what that means, but the salespeople still do their own prospecting, by the way, even though marketing doesn't want them to do it, they still do it. the number of calls that are devoted to sales development of a qualified to get a lead to be qualified. That's sometimes called sales qualified. Proposal and or closing calls, clearly not as many calls in that category, but they're pretty critical, obviously. And then the majority of salespeople's calls are in this category, and that's called relationship building. Most salespeople call on current customers, and they call on them to build relationships to obviously expand the business, upsell, cross-sell. This generally is the largest category of calls. Finally, another category, customer service and or competitive response calls. So tag your calls in this category and see what they come out in terms of an actual number and the percentage of time. And time allocation is a big issue for salespeople. Selling face-to-face, and now I'm going to include phone and email here, because salespeople are basically omni-channel or omni-media, if you will, in working with their current customer base. And they're now already doing phone and email. So I'm going to include that in the selling time. Unfortunately, most studies have indicated that selling time is not very high. The lowest I've seen is 21%, and a recent study I saw was 37%. So the question is, what is your selling time? Obviously, another time allocation for salespeople is the CRM systems, which is a love-hate relationship for most salespeople, and their data and information updating in the CRM system. Obviously, salespeople research their prospects and their industries and their customers to know what's going on. And then the ones in time devoted to reports, meetings, and training can be a pretty big one in some companies. And then the ever-present travel and waiting. And when I say waiting, I'm talking about waiting in lobbies for the sales appointment to take place. Okay, next. So for every one of the areas, this slide is going to appear, and that is what to do now. I'm not going to talk so much about what and why, but what to do. Meet with the salespeople and involve them in rethinking the sales coverage. Now, this is a fairly difficult meeting to have. I'm sure you can understand why. You're going to get pushback. The salespeople know what's going on, and they're going to be in fear of their compensation model and, well, maybe even fear of their job. But the fact of the matter is that you need their input, and you need to get them into the process of rethinking. You need to establish those benchmarks that I just talked about, and do this in a no penalty environment. One of the long-standing problems in sales management is that sales management, and sometimes even executive management, talks about how many calls are you making. It's a numbers game. You've all heard those phrases. So you've got to do these benchmarks in a no penalty box environment. We're not trying to penalize anybody, but based on the past results or past activities, we just want the data. You need to also calculate the cost of your sales call. This is a very important statistic. Many times the vice president of sales is afraid of this statistic, because as soon as it's known to people, particularly executive group, the next thing is said is, you got to reduce it. Now, the formula to calculate the cost per call obviously includes the cost of the salesperson and their travel, benefits, and so on. But the McGraw-Hill formula that was established many years ago, which is the benchmark of the industry, is that you also need to include sales management and sales support in the overall cost, then divided by the number of sales calls to get your cost per call. It generally is higher than you think. Then you finally need to be thinking about all methods and media to connect and communicate to the contacts out there in the marketplace, whether they be prospects or customers. And when I say all media and method, obviously I'm talking about the classic media of email, mail, and phone. Social is included, even though we've tend to poo-poo social media with the exception of LinkedIn and B2B, but other social media is becoming increasingly important. And one idea that I'd like to talk about, and actually one of the white papers that we've promised, is the power of impact mailings, is that direct mail is making a comeback. Part of the reason for that is open up your inbox every day and see how many emails you get. And then that also can be true for voicemails. The idea of direct mail is meaning that you're going to be able to deliver a message to the individual, hopefully at their business address, maybe even at their home address. And one idea that you might want to consider with the reduction of sales calls is the idea of impact mailings, something that goes bump in the mail. The white paper on this is rather interesting, has 5 examples that you'd like to look at and a number of ideas. Okay, next. Area number 2, there's going to be a change in the buying process. There's no question about that. It's already occurred. We've moved to virtual meetings and communications versus in person. Sure wish I had some shares of Zoom. That would have been a good investment. One of the real things that is sort of a downer for us is that in B2B, trade shows and events have been a staple for lead generation. And in fact, on average, 21% of the marketing budget in B2B is used for trade shows and events. They don't exist right now. They're not happening. Even though Vegas just opened up, it wasn't talking about the conference center. Excuse me. It's going to be slow to recover. We don't know how fast the large events are going to come back. I expect that smaller events will come back faster than large trade shows. But this is a real downer for us. And so we're going to be moving. In fact, there's now a movement on some of these trade show organizations to move to virtual trade shows, and that's good. One thing that I found interesting as I was studying the virtual communication area, it was a Harvard study, and basically said that you only remember or generally recall the first 10 minutes of a virtual communication. And again, we're not face-to-face, we're virtual. So be a bit careful on this one. One of the temptations is to pack that virtual communications with all kinds of information and make it go long. In fact, this schedule is only to be 30 minutes, so we hopefully will keep to that time. And one of the things you got to remember is that the first 10 minutes are critical. So be careful. It's probably a good suggestion to do more virtual communications than longer ones. Now, it's going to be increasingly difficult to break through as email and voicemail will be even more overloaded. It's already overloaded as before COVID-19, but it's going to be more overloaded as we go forward. Direct mail will continue its comeback, frankly, for that very reason. And as mentioned, social media will become increasingly important. I think we all need to become LinkedIn experts. Content marketing has dominated over the past number of years. And obviously, I think most people are aware of the Content Marketing Institute in my old hometown of Cleveland, Ohio. But it's going to dominate even more. In fact, one of the things that will happen is we have content clutter now. And I'm just going to say we're going to go into content overload. Even though you're going to produce a lot of content, the key issue is how to get it read and remembered by your target audiences. And the buying process will change, obviously. Now, one of the things that typically has been the rule in the B2B is that the old funnel, the linear funnel, start with the awareness and move all the way down to sales. One of the things that has been true over the years is that it's never been linear. And may even be less so nowadays. It goes back and forth between various aspects of the sales process or the buying process. And I think in the future, it'll be less linear than in the past. And it will also likely lengthen. Okay, what to do now? Meet with your customer-facing staff and redefine the likely buying process. And do it by segment, market segment. Many segments are different than others, and therefore they will be different by buying process. Again, this is important input. You're going to get some insight that you need from the people that are, and this includes customer service as well as obviously the sales and marketing departments. Now, you're going to be focused more on customer retention, up, and cross-sell. Demand generation, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, but demand generation or new business is going to be increasingly difficult to get. In fact, most people are frozen in their tracks right now about new purchases. But the fact is that you're going to need to focus on your current customer base to get new business, and that includes up and cross-sell. Key here, a very important key, and one of the things that SalesIntel does so well, is that you need to expand your contacts within your customer base, meaning your contact data. Salespeople typically have been responsible for putting into the CRM system the contacts and customers. That includes inside sales as well. But generally, when you look at the buying process and the functions that are involved in the buying process, you're going to find a lot of gaps within your current customer database. So you need to expand those contexts because you're going to need to communicate more and more to those current customers and more people within the customers. Now, here's a point that I found sort of interesting as I was talking to some of our clients and people that I know in the business. There's someone, if you're in a relatively large company, there's someone in your company who's responsible for buying. Ask them how they are going to change their buying process. You're going to get some insight, and pretty candid insight, frankly, because they have no reason not to tell you what they're going to do, as opposed to doing surveys. Not always do you have somebody in your organization who's responsible for buying, but people in general buy things. So you might say, okay, how are you going to change your buying process? Now, also a very important element here in doing the buying approach or the buying process approach, excuse me, is you need to define, you need to have a common definition of the buying functions. There's been a recent problem. Years ago, we took titles for function. You know, VP of sales was, guess what? The VP of sales. But there's been an inflation in titles, and they're all over the map now. So titles don't necessarily reflect the function. So I suggest in your database that you have another field, and let's talk about buying function. In the white paper that you'll be getting in support of this webinar, I detail a number of functions that you might want to use. Just to tick them off real quickly, kind of functions that I typically use in developing databases. And the decision makers, clearly we know what that means. The recommender, who's the recommender of this product or service? Who's the approver? Who's the performer or user? The inputter, and of course the economic buyer. Those are just generic definitions of the buying process, but something that you need to come to some agreement with and have that definition understood throughout the company so we all know what we're talking about and who we're talking about. And then finally, obviously, you need to align the marketing and sales approach to this new buying process. It will change, and you need to align your process to the buying process. Don't think about how you want to sell. Think about how buyers want to buy. Okay, number 3. Now, in the past, there's been a big movement already to inside sales. And in fact, in 2018, of the 5.7 million salespeople in the B2B world, 52% only are outside now. The projections before COVID-19 were that in 2020, the number of inside salespeople would exceed the number of outside salespeople. So this movement is well underway, and it will accelerate now. The good news is the productivity goes up. Number of calls, contacts, all of that stuff goes up. The bad news is it's at the cost of human relationships, because that's one of the big values of a face-to-face sales call. But it's well underway, and it will accelerate. There's a lot written about this, and I have a recommendation in the what to do now slide in a moment, but the 2 models to consider. And this model, by the way, teaming outside and inside salespeople on the same territory or the same account. In other words, it's not a handoff. The inside salesperson teams with an outside salesperson and works the territory and or account together. This was a model we used in IBM and was extremely successful. Compensation is an issue. Typically, inside salespeople are not paid at the rate of outside salespeople, but if they team together, you're going to have to rethink the compensation of those 2 individuals. Finally, this is what's happening already. That a salesperson, I'm talking about an outside salesperson now, is already a dual salesperson. They're working as both an inside and outside salesperson covering their territory or their accounts, and they're doing this now. If you think about this as a future model, then you're going to have to rethink, obviously, the recruiting and hiring profiles of salespeople to ensure that they're able to do both inside and outside activity. Now, for many organizations, and particularly large organizations, there's the role of what we call strategic account managers. This may be the most difficult, if you will, function to change, because their bread and butter, the reason that they are so good, typically is their ability to be face-to-face with key accounts, and that's at the executive level generally. This may be the most difficult sales function to blend. Okay, what to do now? As I mentioned, there is an association of inside sales professionals, as noted here. Believe it or not, there are 40 chapters of this association, probably in a city you're in or a city close to you. I would suggest you join and learn from them. You got to realistically assess for your particular product or service, how far along the buying process can inside sales take it and be the primary sales role. This may not be necessarily linear. It may mean that you hand it, if you will, the responsibility back and forth between outside and inside. But you need to realistically assess how far. There's been a generally just assumption that, well, we can just do this with inside sales. That's not always the case, particularly when you come to engineered products and services, things that really need a on-site visit. Consider employing an outside. If you've not built an inside sales group before, you might want to consider employing an outside firm to do this. Some years ago, I actually ran a company that we had out 200 telemarketers. It's a different kind of organizational structure and a different kind of management that you have to know. It's not an easy function to manage. You just can't say, okay, let's put Joe on the phone. It's not as easy as that. So you might want to consider employing an outside firm either to start or to supplement your activities. Then you need to select the best, obviously, go-to-market model that blends the inside and outside functions for your particular product or service. And then coming back to the strategic account managers, this is a little bit of typo here, sorry about that. There's an organization in Chicago called SAMA, Strategic Account Management Association, not managers, by the way. Great organization, 3,500 people worldwide. I would suggest that your SAMs, if you have such a function, get involved, join, and learn from this organization. Excellent organization to join. Next, number 4. Lead generation is going to shift, as commented. It's going to move, more new revenue is going to come from current customers than new business in the future. The trade shows are going to come back slowly. And under this environment that we're going to face now and face in the next 12 to 18 months, the biggest inhibition to sales, or if you will, new business, is going to be the status quo attitude. People are just not wanting to go to change. Now, that's good if you're currently the vendor, not so good if you're not. But the status quo attitude will increase. Tim Reister at Corporate Visions speaks a lot about this. That reference is in the white paper. I suggest you tune in and hear Tim's webinars. More new revenue, as mentioned, will come from current customers. One of the things that most people don't realize is that on average already 80% of sales increases from year to year come from current customers. And account-based selling will be key. That's different than account-based marketing. Inside sales will take the buying process closer to the purchase, if not all the way. That's going to be occurring, obviously. And inside sales may be the primary contact for the current customers. In other words, the customer may now begin to look at the inside salesperson as their primary contact. ABM will continue to be important, and I think even more important for lead generation, as focusing on given accounts will probably be what you will need to do to get new business from new accounts. Okay, what to do next, or now rather. Benchmark your prior campaigns, just like your sales activities. You need to benchmark and see where you've been. These are the kind of KPIs that generally are used. Response rates, obviously, cost of the campaign, or cost of the lead by campaign. Conversion rates from leads to qualified leads, and then obviously conversion rate from queue leads to sales. When you're doing this, then you need to identify what messages and offer work best, because you want to double down on those. You need to increase your content offers at every stage of the buying process. Content offers have typically been at the beginning of the buying process, but now you're going to probably want to continue that through all phases, even to the point of lost customers. How many times do you go after lost customers? That's another webinar. Teach everyone how to write response-generating copy for emails. This generally is a little controversial, but generally salespeople don't know how to write well. And I'm not saying they don't know how to write reports, but they don't know how to write, quote, response-generating copy. This is copy that gets people to engage and respond. It's not an awareness message. So actually, we're developing some training programs on this very issue, but it's going to be key in the future. Next. Now, what fuels all of this? It's the database. Of course, the analogy has been made frequently that this is the gas that runs the car, and it's even more important now with all of the software that we're using. You need to check your data accuracy. Where are you currently in your own data accuracy? Contact level data decays much faster than people think. We've done a study on this, and one of the white papers we're offering is on data decay, which details this in great granularity. Contact level data decays at a 60 to 70% rate per year. When we say this, what we're meaning is that if you take out your business card, check what's changed in the last 12 months, 60 to 70% of those business cards will come back with one or more check marks. Firmographic data or data on the company changes, but not as high. And will likely be higher in post-COVID-19. Obviously, there's already the issue of people being laid off. Obviously, that means a change in the database, companies going out of business. So question is, where does your database stand with accuracy today? Secondly, go and define what you need in your database versus what you want in your database. One of the biggest mistakes that is made in companies, particularly B2B companies, is that everybody goes around the room and says, what would you like in the database? And when they do that, the database criteria will never be satisfied and probably take 15 to 20 years. One of the approaches to define what you need in your database versus what you want is your segmentation approach. Again, one of the white papers we're offering is on segmentation. It's a long one, and it details 9 segmentation models. But segmentation and the agreement that this is how we want to segment our market will then call out the data you need to define your segments. Then, and this is obviously one of the reasons that SalesIntel and us are doing this webinar together, is you need to find a data partner. And you need to find someone that has good data accuracy and in-depth data, such as SalesIntel. I'm one of my favorites, if not my favorite. One of the reasons is that you can find that the data is 95% accurate, which is a really high number, because it's human verified. It's not just only scraped from the internet. In fact, I don't even know if they do that. But they do confirm their data accuracy by human verified contact. They have, believe it or not, 48 million mobile work numbers. This has become increasingly important to people who are working from their home, not necessarily in their office. And then research on demand. They verify 140,000 contacts every week using 200 full-time researchers. And finally, the ability to launch data gathering on specific accounts. Good example, my son-in-law used to call on Caterpillar. He still may do it now, I'm not quite so sure. In fact, he's on the webinar. And if he's calling on Caterpillar, he may want to know more who's in the Caterpillar organization, and you can ask SalesIntel to gather that data for you. That obviously takes that time away from the salesperson to do that. Next. Okay, to sum it up, or what to do now, excuse me. Check your database, take 100 random records of customers and prospects, check for accuracy and completeness, form a data team, and find a leader. Now that's not easy to do, because I don't know many people who want to be the leader of the database. Obviously focus on the 4 big questions. And I'll jump to the last one. What are you going to do with the data once you get it? If you can't answer that question, it shouldn't be on the database. And then finally, consider using a customer data platform. In most B2B companies, there are at least 3 to 5 data silos internally. It's going to be difficult to put all of that data together. You want to take it outside likely and put it in a customer data platform. My good friend David Rabb runs a newsletter on this on a daily basis. It's in the reference in the white paper. And that is a way to take all your data and merge it into one database. Okay, now you might, next, you might consider what I've just been telling you is a bunch of nonsense, and that's why I like this slide. Nonsense seems to sum up everything. Well, hopefully you don't think it's all nonsense. So here's what I suggest you do now. To sum it up, act now. You've got the time. Things are at a lull. And frankly, competition is going to be doing it, so you better think about beating them to the punch. Customize the 5 recommendations that I've just talked about to your market. Obviously, B2B is a wide array of products and services, so you need to customize it to your situation, obviously. Don't leave out sales and distributor network in the discussions. These are difficult conversations, but there's 2 reasons to do this. One is their input will be valuable. Secondly, as you all know, when you're involved in the discussions, you'll be better to buy into the resulting sales coverage model if you were involved initially in talking about it. And then finally, here's the irony of this whole situation. Sales calls will be fewer, but ironically, the ones that are made will be more important than ever before. And the simple reason is that when a sales call is justified, the reason for that sales call, both from the selling and buying perspective, will be more critical. So while sales calls will be fewer, they will be more important. All right, back over to you, Jason.
Great. Thank you so much, John. Obviously, we're a few minutes over already. John and I, neither one have a hard stop. So if anybody has any questions for us, happy to hang around and do Q&A session. Yeah, just drop any questions you have in the chat or the Q&A panel for Zoom, and we'll make sure to get to those. While we wait for that, John, what are some of the biggest changes or trends that you're seeing so far right now?
Well, probably the biggest one is that the salespeople of themselves, excuse me, the outside salespeople are really sort of learning how to be inside salespeople. It's not terribly comfortable for them. They're not particularly telemarketers, or they're not particularly e-marketers. But that's the way in which they're now changing their behavior because they can't travel, either can't or don't want to. And further than that, even if they wanted to travel, the buyer probably wouldn't want to see them. So they're having to find those ways to communicate. Zoom has obviously come up. I wish, frankly, I had some stock in Zoom, but I didn't. So those are the kinds of things that are changing. Those are the biggest changes I'm seeing now.
Cool. And then along with that, then it looks like we had a few questions come in. Do you see that as primarily being a temporary trend that will largely reverse as macro conditions change, or do you see that as more of a acceleration of a permanent trend?
I think it's an acceleration of a current trend. I saw a statistic the other day that now 73% of communications are all virtual. I don't think that's going to, frankly, stay at that high level. But the fact of the matter is that this will accelerate the trends that I talked about. It's going to be a different world out there. 2 years from now, 5 years from now, are we going to be back to normal? Probably more normal than we are going to be in the next 6 to 12 months. But the fact of the matter is that I think these trends, and for cost reasons, if nothing else, and efficiencies, buyers are just not willing to see salespeople. That's one of the reasons that the calls per day have declined, is that buyers are just not receptive. They say, send me an email on that. Do we have to meet? But the sales calls, as I mentioned, that are going to be made will be more critical. Now, more presentations, more closing calls. Those are the kinds of calls that are going to be made always. We're hardwired to be humans. We're hardwired to do business with other people, and we're hardwired to do that in a face-to-face environment. So that'll never be gone.
Cool. All right, we've got a few questions that have come through. One, Tom was asking us to elaborate on the 60-70% contact data decay rate. How do you measure this? I can speak to it. I know you can as well. John, I'll take a real quick first pass at it. So data decay refers to just anything that may change relative to a contact. So that can be anything from like a name change. Somebody got married and changed their last name, to changing of their email address. Companies all the time will go through how they format email addresses. Sometimes they'll change a domain name, from a .io to a .com, something like that. Changes in title, role, responsibility within the organization, then all the way down to the big ones, like they retired, they left the company, went to work for somebody else, their phone number changed, they passed away. And so, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff that can change. And the 30% data decay just says 30% of your records, if you start with 100% pristine, accurate data, then over the course of a year, you can expect about 30% of those records to have errors in it after that year. John?
Yeah, well, one of the big changes that is sort of not tracked is that somebody has the same job title, but their responsibility has changed. So that's one of the things that hasn't been tracked. We actually asked this when I used to speak a lot. 1,025 records of people in the audience handed in their business card with check marks as to what changed in the last 12 months. And that's where we got those statistics. Art Hanks years ago in their computer intelligence company documented a 60% change rate. So that's where those statistics come from.
Cool. All right. Joe asked, how effective do you think virtual trade shows will be for engaging with prospects? Any strategies to make this better? So I've had quite a bit of experience with these, and then I'll let you answer as well, John. The advantages to virtual trade shows that I've experienced is typically you get a much larger lead list, because typically you're going to get access to everybody that registered for the virtual trade show, versus in-person trade shows, typically all you get are the people that come by your booth and you scan. And so that's a double-edged sword. It gives you a whole lot more people to follow up with, but they're also typically less qualified because they didn't self-select out to go have a conversation with you. And so it takes a whole lot more nurturing and follow-up to get the conversations going and to actually turn that into a real opportunity off of that bigger, less qualified list. And so you got to sort of approach it as a different strategy. You have to go through and do your own qualification, your own nurturing and warming of those, versus having, you know, relatively hot leads from the people that took it upon themselves to come and talk to you at the event. And so, you know, the question of how effective that is largely is dependent on how well equipped you are to be able to handle that other model, because obviously that is more of a run it through marketing and run it through an SDR team for nurturing and qualification before you pass it to your AEs for trying to turn it into an op, versus they're going to be further down the funnel, typically at an in-person event.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jason. Actually, in many trade shows, we call these the people that stop by for the Snickers bar. You know, they're stop bys. That's pretty much what the virtual trade shows will get you. The big difference will be if your salespeople at the personal, you know, in-person trade show are really good at qualifying the individual face-to-face. That's what you will miss in the virtual trade show. And that obviously varies all the way from company to company, because some companies don't do that well, some companies do. So that's the big gap between virtual and in-person shows.
Yeah, I think it's largely a trade-off between quantity and quality. And so you just have to go into it expecting that, you know, you're going to have to work harder to qualify and convert those leads you generate from a virtual one. All right, Ben's asking, if you're looking for a new sales job today, would you lean more toward an inside or outside position, and why? I'll let you go with that one, John.
Well, it all depends on what you like to do. There are obviously a lot of people that don't want to be stuck inside all day long and making phone calls and sending emails. Personally, I'm more of an outside person. I'd rather see people face to face. I've learned to do the other. Obviously, the growth market is inside sales. So if you're looking for a job, you probably want to look for inside sales. Unfortunately, the downside of that is that they typically pays less. So you might want to look at companies that believe in that blended model, where you are going to be working with, in conjunction with, an outside salesperson. They're going to share the responsibility for sales between you, the two of you, and that might then obviously allow the organization to increase the compensation for the inside person. As I mentioned, that was an IBM model. We worked on that very hard, and it generally was by territory. So the outside person would have one or two inside people that they teamed with, and they did adjust the compensation models to raise the inside salesperson's salary, if you will, and bonus based on results. And we used to call that leverage compensation. I don't know if that advice strikes everybody as good, but that's the growth market. Outside sales is not going to be the growth market.
And then a corollary to that, Albert's asking, you know, current sales organizations may not survive for the next, 12 to 24 months. What's the best strategy for preparing for the long term?
Well, it really depends on what you're selling. You know, as an example, if you're selling something like a commodity level kind of product or service, let's say you're talking about sales promotion items. There probably won't be any outside salespeople in the future. On the other hand, if you're in a company, some months ago, I worked with a company that made material handling equipment, and they had to go on site to do the measurements. I mean, there was actually a reason to go face to face. That will never disappear. So when you get into very complex and high value, in fact, you could, do the old consultant 4-box grid, right? On one side, you have the complexity of the sale. On the other side of the grid, you have the value of the sale, or the cost of the product or service. And when you go to the upper right-hand corner of that box, where you have a very complex sale and you have a very high value, those sales forces will not go away. They will be there will be a face-to-face component. It doesn't mean that there won't be an inside component, but that face-to-face component will never go away there. So the answer to the question is, it depends on what you're selling.
Yeah, and I would approach it primarily from two different perspectives. There's the company perspective. Have you been, as far as what you sell or your selling process or whatever, has that been negatively affected by the current state of affairs? In which case, it's time to get creative, potentially pivot, but figure out a way to adjust to take advantage of, fit within the new realities. The other, if you're looking at this from the perspective of an individual salesperson, obviously you want your company to be reacting to that. If they're not reacting to that and you're concerned about your job, then obviously in your job search, go out and look for the companies that are either pivoting or just by sheer luck, we're in a good position to capitalize on or benefit from these circumstances, scenarios. I mean, we did that when we retooled our sales efforts here at SalesIntel when everything happened. One of the very first things we did is we went out and mined the data and the companies for companies that based off of their offering should be doing well during this time. And then we prioritized those accounts for our SDR and account executives teams to be going after. And that worked well for us versus if we had just continued with the same list of priority accounts that we had pre-COVID. We probably would have been largely spinning our wheels. So, just a little bit of advice there at kind of the company organization level versus individual salesperson level. Barb was asking, John, do you have a white paper or collateral on suggested email copy?
Yes, I do. Actually, we're developing right now. Ironically, that you talked about, I'm working with one of my compatriots in the world of sales training, John Boynes, and we're coming up with basically a training course on how to write copy. Now, when I say copy, at my core, I'm a direct marketer, and direct marketing copy is different than regular copy. Obviously, there's some ways in which you write direct marketing copy that is different than you might think, and I won't get into it now, but the answer is yes, we're developing that. I don't have it today, but I would say that within the next 30 days, we will have a white paper on that very subject with specific suggestions and rules on how to write copy. When I talk about the subject, I always like to quote Bob Stone, one of the legendary direct marketers. Unfortunately, Bob has passed away many years ago, but there were Bob Stone's 7 copy rules. And the copy rule number 1 was in your very first sentence, no later than the very first paragraph, pitch your biggest and best benefit or your most important offer. And rule number 2, repeat rule number 1. And so some people don't think along those lines. People tend to write inductively, which they mean they lead up to something. No, you want to write deductively. You want to start out with the biggest thing and then support it. So that'll all be detailed in the program and maybe in the training materials as well.
Cool. All right, I'm starting to run short on time, so we got one last one here. Question about direct mail. So you mentioned direct mail is making a comeback. Variable data printing is going to have an impact as well, which means the data is going to be important. Thoughts? I'll let you start with that. I've got a few thoughts of my own on that one, but I'll let you begin.
Yeah, the rule of actually most any communication, and it goes to direct mail as well, is the higher the degree of relevancy, the higher the engagement and response rate. Data will drive the relevancy. Now, variable data printing obviously gives us the technique to be able to put a custom message in every communication we have in direct mail. And make sure your database is accurate, though. And what I would just say is that in the context of the clutter that is occurring in email and voicemail, direct mail will make a comeback. In fact, statistics are now that with an accurate list and good relevancy, response rates are now 6%, which generally shocks people because the old saw was 1 to 3%, but now it's really gone up. But it also depends upon the relevancy of the message and the offer to the individual.
Yeah, and I did a webinar a couple of months back with PFL, who helps to automate direct mail campaigns. So it was extremely well received webinar. So if you want to reply to the email we'll send with a recap to this, I'm happy to send you that as well. A couple of additional thoughts around that. So data is crucial to direct mail, not just in the context of variable data printing, but also just making sure you're getting the right mail to the right people. So even if your data is correct as far as what you're putting into it, as far as the variable data, if you're not segmenting that correctly, then you're not going to get that creative copy to the right people. And then also with direct mail, obviously you got to get it to where they are to receive the mail. And that's complicated on several levels. You've got to first have the right address. Two, you've got to make sure that address is actually the office that they work in. Versus the headquarters, the home office. That's one of the advantages we have in our data set is we can give you the actual location of where that person works as opposed to just the headquarters address. The other wrinkle to that, of course, is now that most of us are working from home, it's even more difficult to try and deliver direct mail to the right place. So the short answer to that is yes, data is even more crucial than ever for the effectiveness of direct mail campaigns. And then also I forgot to mention for Bard, the one asking about the email copy stuff. Same goes for you. Just reply to the email that we're going to be sending with the recap and remind us of your question about that. We'll make sure that we follow up with you and get you the details on the collateral that John's putting together for those new pieces.
Yeah, Jason, real quick, one more plug about the impact mailing piece. In B2B, we have the luxury of generally having a high margin product or service that we're selling, which allows us to use the impact, the impact approach. This is a real secret weapon. There's actually a company out here in Phoenix called Zendaso who specializes in this. And I just really want to plug it. It's been extremely successful in campaigns that we have done.
Yeah, we work with Sendoso as well as a partner. So we've worked with most of the major players out there, but so I would strongly encourage you to take a look at those different options that are out there. And for most of those, Sendoso being a perfect example, they have both options for direct mail as well as they can help you with your virtual giveaway campaigns for gift cards and stuff like that.
Brownies in the mail work.
Yep. So, all right. Like I said, I've got to hop here. Thanks everybody for all of the great Q&A and engagement on this. Like I said, we will get an email out shortly to everybody with the recap. It'll probably go out tomorrow after we've had time to edit everything, get it up on the site. But look for that email, and then as you have any additional questions, you have additional collateral that you would like us to get to, anything like that, just reply to that email, and we'll get back to you. All right. Thanks everybody so much. Thanks, John. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.